We're speaking now with Rosalie Schantz and Thomas Schantz. Rosalie was a helper in Belgium at age 16 with her mom, and they live now in Green Valley, Arizona. And they'll tell us a little bit about Glenn Brennicky, who one of the gentlemen that they helped. But over there in Belgium in 1942, right? What was it like, and what would you do? What did you do?
Well, we were occupied by the Germans, naturally, and my brother joined the Red Cross when he was 14, and he used to go to the, whenever there was a bombardment, he had to go and clean up, get the people, and I'm not too good when I know somebody's...
Would the Germans make him do it, or the Belgians?
The Belgian. He belonged to the Belgian Red Cross. See, and the Germans would bomb, and he'd go and get the bodies and look for live ones. And I was a courier.
You say the Germans would bomb. This is when they were attacking your country.
That's right.
Okay, so...
No, the Americans would bomb while we were occupied. See,
there we go.
Thanks for the help.
You're welcome, honey. So then your brother would go help clean up and take care of that.
Yeah.
And you weren't, I guess you might have been a little bit mad at the Americans.
No, never.
Why not?
We would always say, come on, and get him, come on and get him, you know. We were glad when they bombed.
Because you knew they weren't after you, they were after the bad guys.
That's right. And if some of us get killed, well, that was too bad. You know, it was just...
What a courageous attitude.
Well, you know, the attitude people have these days about civilians getting killed and all that stuff, but that's the war.
Yeah.
You know, and we risked our life every day by doing what we did. When Glenn was at our house, he was there for 3 or 4 weeks. And
let's get a picture of Glenn Bennett. Just hold it right in front of you here.
We had a store, a grocery store. So my mother ran the grocery store. My brother belonged to the Red Cross and did all, and I was a courier. You hear about the carpetbaggers?
Mm-hmm.
You know what they are?
Sure, carpetbaggers, sir. You carry the groceries.
Yeah.
See, whatever they drop, I would go pick up and bring to the one that would send me.
Maybe I don't know. What are you talking? Who dropped what?
The carpetbaggers. You explain that.
Carpetbaggers were they used B-24s that were stripped and painted black, and the lower turret was removed, and that was what they called the Joe hole, where the agents would be dropped behind the lines, and also supplies would be dropped, and they were to go in. They flew alone, go into an area where no active bombing was going on. And they became known as the carpetbaggers. They were used in France and Belgium and Norway. And Bernd Balkan, if you know who he was the leader in Norway. Of course, he was Norwegian, and he was the leader of the carpetbaggers in Norway.
So they'd go to an unlit area that's controlled by the Belgians, and with signals from the ground, they would make their drops.
They make their drop, and then
you would distribute.
No, I would go to the farm or whatever, usually in farms that they would drop or bare land, and then they would send me to go pick up a suitcase or whatever there is to pick up. So I go to that farm, have a password, then they let me in, give me the stuff, and then I take it home. Take it to, not home, but to the fellow that sent me.
And if you were caught, Rosalie,
they kill me.
Bad girl.
Yeah, no, they just kill me.
You knew it at the time.
Oh, yeah.
You did it anyway.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was necessary, you know.
Yes, it was. Well, tell me about a typical day in your life. You'd wake up in the morning, and then how would you help? How would you help your mom?
Well, we had a grocery store to start with, and I would work in the grocery store. My brother was an apprentice furrier. He would work outside, and then, but when we were called, we would go take off. My mother would stay home and run the store and feed the troops, like we called, because we had some people that were hiding from the Germans, like Jews and anything. They would come and spend a few days if they had to hide, and then she had to feed them all. And I would go, when I would go to the farms where I pick up stuff to bring back to Brussels, I would buy some food, some ham and things to bring home so we could feed them. And that's one reason I knew about every farm in the Ardennes that exists, that were good farms.
And? Well?
Well,
Tell them about your experience with Glenn.
oh, and one day Glenn wanted to go to the park. I'll tell that one first. Thanks for the help. He said he wanted to go outside. I said, okay, one day I'll take you out. So our store was here, and the park was just catty corner around. We had to cross the street, and there a little further up was a little park. Said, I'll take you to the park. So I go outside and look, and there is an SS on the corner, on the street, four corners, and he's there with his gun, you know, and I said, oh, everything's okay, come on, Glenn. And he looked, take one peek, and he grabbed me by the collar and pulled me back in. He said, no, no, no. He says, that way I don't want to go out. I don't want to go to the park. He said,
you were an SS man.
yeah.
Oh, goodness.
So he said, if they catch us, I'm a prisoner, he said, and he'll shoot you right in front of me. He said, I couldn't see that. I couldn't take that. So that was all for his going to the park.
Well, he stayed inside. Good.
So one morning at 5 o'clock, we heard a banging on the door. And we knew what it was. It was the Gestapo that was there. So we told Glenn, go in the back. We had a wall, and we had a roof where our vegetables stayed under for the store. And we said, get up there and go on the other side of the wall before we let them in. So then my brother let them in the front door, and they come and go right away to the back where it escaped. And one of the Germans tried to get on top of that little roof, and as he got up there, the roof collapsed and he fell. So I started to laugh. It was a nervous laugh. You know, I started to laugh. And the German that was standing next to me, he turned around and slapped me in the face. And but I knew Glenn was safe. Soon he wasn't going to try it again. So he put the gun in my back and made me go down the basement and upstairs and everywhere around the house. And when Glenn finally came back over the fence after they left, he looked at my face and he said, what happened? So I told him. And he cried like a baby.
I bet he did.
Yeah.
You sort of saved his life there by laughing.
Yeah.
There must have been another incident about Glenn or by some of the people you want to tell about, or the Germans.
Oh, there's so many little things that that happens that you think about sometimes and get nightmares about them.
You still have nightmares about them?
Oh, yeah.
What about a radio? Did you have a radio? How'd you get information?
Oh, yeah, we had a radio. We listened to London.
So you had a radio, and the Germans would come in the house and feel the radio, see if it's warm?
Yeah, we didn't have that radio out. That was a small radio that was hidden all the time. And we just listened to it, not a regular radio.
Well, towards the end of the war, when the Germans were leaving, what happened then? when the Germans were leaving,
Yeah.
the Allies were coming in.
Yeah,
How'd they?
Well, one thing, we lost our store. We had to move
Oh,
because the Gestapo was behind us, and the police from Anderlecht, Brussels, where we lived, there were a few good ones. And they came over and said in the middle of the night, you gotta leave because they're gonna come and get you and your brother. And so we just left the store. The police moved us as much as they could get and moved us to an apartment where they would bomb close to the railroad station on the 4th floor in an apartment. So we left everything behind and moved up there. But when the troop and my brother and I, we kept doing our work that we were doing, and we had people downstairs. It was a fish market, and they would warn us when they saw Gestapo. They were always in front of the store, walking around or sitting or
whistling or making some sort of, yeah.
yeah. And so finally at the end, my brother and I went to the Ardennes. That was the last thing. We went to the Ardennes, and we weren't there when Brussels was liberated. We were hiding ourselves.
Yeah, I bet it were.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very interesting story. Now let's get a picture of your mom in here and tell us a little bit about her. Let's put it right here. How's the angle on that?
Probably ought to drop it down to her knees.
Getting a little, okay, that's good. You want it angled towards you a little bit?
See,
No, that's fine right there.
and the certificates that we got from Eisenhower and what's his
Tedder.
name? And Tedder.
Let me read it.
They were
The President of the United States of America has directed me to express to Olivia Eckhout
that's her maiden name. She
it-
was divorced from my father.
the gratitude and appreciation of the American people for gallant service in assisting the escape of Allied soldiers from the enemy. Dwight D. Eisenhower, General of the Army.
And then that one from the English.
This certificate is awarded to Olivia Eckhout. Is that correct pronunciation?
Eckhout.
Eckhout, in a token of gratitude for and appreciation of the help given to the sailors, soldiers, and airmen of the British Commonwealth of Nations, which enabled them to escape or evade capture by the enemy. Air Chief Marshal, Deputy Supreme Commander, Allied Expeditionary War,
Arthur
Tedder.
Tedder.
Tedder. Oh, wow. Golly. That's something.
Yeah, he was Eisenhower's deputy.
And that was my brother and me at that time.
And this is your mother.
And that's my mother, yeah.
Actually, it's
Freedom Fighters, Belgium, 1942 to 1945.
Honey, that's great.
her mother's name was Oliva, not Olivia. That was
Yeah.
It doesn't
a
matter.
mistake
Well,
that
that's
was
my
made, but-
American bastardization of the English language.
He,
Well, it's wrong.
he put that together for my 70th birthday, and I told him, I said, why did you have to do that while I'm alive? Why didn't you
Because I
do
knew
it
they were
after
gonna
I'm
take a
gone?
picture of it with you.
Oh,
That's why I did it.
that's 8 years ago.
Well, you won't have to hold it. Well, that's not all the story. We've got some more to go here. Tell me about your mom. What was her job? What,
Well, as I said, she was running the thing, you know, at home. She stayed at home, so the flyers would come. Now, Glenn is the only one that stayed a length of time. The others would come maybe for 1 day or a night or 2 days or 2 nights and then get moved to another place.
how many men did you help?
9
9 of them.
flyers, plus some Jews, some other people that were hiding from the Germans. I don't know how many.
You said it was 7 American
Well, I know,
and 2 British.
I know that was the flyers, but I
Yeah.
mean the other, you know.
Yeah, well, the Jewish, or the Germans were after Jewish people.
Oh, yeah. Hmm.
You help hide any of them?
Yeah. But not when Glenn was there at the end. And when we had somebody that stayed that long, we didn't want to take anybody else because that was too dangerous. Because they would only stay a couple days and go. And if they go and they get caught and we still have the flyer with us, that wouldn't be good.
Yeah.
So we didn't have anybody anymore.
That's right. Towards the end of the war, of course, I was young and sort of interested in what was going on, but I didn't know anything about the slave labor camps or the ovens and whatever it was.
Yeah.
Auschwitz. Did you know anything about that at the time?
Yeah. We knew what was going on. That's why we hid when Jews would come, you know, that's why we were hiding them. But we didn't know in the beginning, we didn't know for sure that that was going that far.
Yes.
Except at the end we knew.
Yeah, at the end everybody knew, and we were sort of shocked about that. A lot of folks that probably of your friends were picked up and sent to Germany.
Yeah.
Well, your brother might have been one of those folks. How did he escape that?
Well, we were lucky at that time, but see, my brother, he joined the army as soon as Belgium was liberated. He joined the army attached to Patton, and he got hurt in Bonn, Germany, and they brought him back to Brussels to the hospital in May.
Sort of tough, isn't it?
And he died August the 12th,
Oh, he did?
1945.
He was hurt pretty badly.
Yeah, he was in the Belgian military hospital from May until until September, and we knew he wasn't going to make it. So when he asked to come home, and we had a hard time with the military. They said, well, he would lose his military status. So I kept going from one captain to general to thing. They said, well, he wants to come home. Can't I take care of him? I was working for the RAF hospital. I was a nurse. I was working by the end, I was working at the RAF hospital. And I would go every evening, I would go to the hospital, and they gave him a private room so I could stay most of the night. And then in the morning, I go home, get cleaned up, and go back to work. And that was every day. So the general finally said, well, don't you let him go home. She can take care, if she quits her job, she can take care of him, and we'll send the doctor over to check on him all the time. So we did. And I took care of him. And then he died August the 12th.
August the 12th.
45.
What a loss.
He was 18.
18? I can put myself in your shoes, and I can commiserate with you 100 proof. That's 100 proof, that's 200%. Yeah.
That's why I never wanted to talk about anything before.
Okay, well, we won't talk about it anymore. We'll see, I want to find out how you came to the United States and what happened, who made the decision then.
Why, there's one other...
Why don't you tell that?
No, there was another aspect of her being in the Ardennes,
Okay.
which, of course, after the war, they left the Ardennes and went back to Brussels, and they used to go to a Air Force base.
Well, I can tell that. I'm
you
all right
tell
now. Well, after
Where was the Air Force base?
Zaventem Air Force Base. And after we got home from the Ardennes, when everything was clear, one day a captain in the Jeep showed up at our apartment and said, we want Rose and Jules to come with me. So we we knew it was a captain, an American captain. We weren't gonna say no. He said, we're taking you to the air base. So they took us both to the air base, and they had a big party for us at the base.
How nice. Just for you. And this was which?
And my
area?
brother, for me and my brother.
For you and your brother, and which base was that?
Saventem,
Salvador.
yeah. Saventem.
That's in Belgium.
Northeast of Brussels.
Northeast of Brussels.
Yeah.
Okay, now you're in Brussels, but you're here now in the United States now.
No, wait, let her finish the story.
Oh, I'm
Because
sorry.
there's more to it than that.
So-
Go on.
One day it was December 17 or 18. They said, we used to go all the time. My brother and I used to practically live at the base from then. Every weekend, the captain would take us to another air base, and just for us to have fun, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And one day, they had to go pick up an engine in the Ardennes, you know,
This is from an
retreat
airplane that crashed.
from an airplane that had crashed to retrieve an engine. And they asked if I knew of a good place to stay so that they wouldn't have to pitch the tent. I said, sure, I'll go along. So give me an American uniform, a flyer's uniform, you know, with the sheepskin in it. I don't know what you call that.
Yeah.
And we went off to the Ardennes. So we were going to have lunch in Bastogne. So when we arrived in Bastogne, they said, no, you got to keep moving because we're going to get attacked by the Germans. So we left, and an MP about 5 or 10 minutes later stopped us and asked where we came from, and we said, well, we just passed Bastogne. He said, no, you can't have, they've been shelled.
Oh.
So we had
In the middle of the Battle of the Bulge.
the middle of the Battle of the
That's
Bulge
the start,
at the start.
the beginning of it.
So I went to the farm which was close to the airport, to the airplane where the airplane had come down, and I asked the lady if we could stay, and she said, sure, you can stay. And she was glad to see me because she remembered me. Well, her husband had been shot by the Germans because of her activity with us. So they have large kitchens in the farms. So all the troops, we had 7 airmen, so they could stay in the kitchen, and she gave me her bedroom for me to stay in. So when I went upstairs, or was later in the evening, I could hear shooting, you know, in the background. The woods were in the background, and they were shooting, and I said, I can't go to bed. I can't get undressed and go to bed. There I'm sitting all by myself in that bedroom, you know, and I opened the window, and I just sat in the windowsill, and I could hear it coming closer and closer and closer. So about 4 o'clock in the morning or so, I go downstairs and tell the captain, I said, you got to go get that engine real quick because I think the Germans are coming over.
Mm-hmm.
And so they got ready, and they went to start working on the engine to get it. That was about a couple 3 miles from the farm. So I stayed out, the lady from the farm stayed outside with me. And about an hour or so later, a captain comes up, an army captain, comes up with a jeep, and he comes over me. There I am in uniform, so that's why he stopped to talk to me. He says, what are you doing here? Mm-hmm. And I told him what was going on, and so I told him where they were. He says, you gotta leave, you can't stay. So we went to tell them to leave the engine where it was and go back to Brussels. Mm-hmm. So we went back to Brussels, and they had paratroops in the woods, and they were shooting at us. One of the guys was hurt in the leg, but nothing. We got back to Brussels safely.
Well, that's
So it
close.
always close calls, but never.
Well, that's, Rose, that's an interesting story. So then their battle of the Bulge was over, and then after it was over, then the Germans started, sort of realizing then that it wasn't gonna happen for them.
No, that was the end, but they came pretty far into Belgium.
So they did.
Yeah.
Cindy and I were.
They were
back
trying to
home.
get to Antwerp,
Yeah,
see, to
it was seaport.
yeah. But they didn't make it to there. They only got, well, 1/3 of the way there.
Florida Congressman Sam Gibbons, a friend of ours, friend of the family, was over in the Battle of the Bulge. He was with the 101st Airborne as a paratrooper, and he was telling us about it. That was tough. Now, how do you get to the United States? What happened then?
Okay, and that was in 1950.
Mm-hmm.
He came on vacation for how long? 3 months.
However, till the money ran out, and we had about $5,000 between us, so it could have lasted a long time.
Wait a minute.
Fred.
I missed a spot here.
Oh.
How did you meet Rose?
Well,
Well, you tell that
yeah, it
story.
sort of begins on how I happened to end up in Belgium.
Okay.
My very good friend, we went to grade school and high school together. He got turned down to the American Army, so he went to Canada, and they welcomed him, and he became, he was with an anti-tank group, the Canadian Army, and they fought in northwest Belgium.
Mm-hmm.
And they were captured, but the Germans that captured them were surrounded by American troops if you went far enough out. So the war was over, and he got to Brussels and saw the museums and things, and he and I have always read about World War I and airplanes and this, that, and the other. So we were both working at Studebaker in the fall of '49. And after second shift, and we stopped and had a beer, and he said, I'd sure like to go back to Belgium. And I said, well, I spent 2 years in the Philippines, and I've never been to Europe, so it sounds like a good idea. So we both had paid up cars, sold them, and I said we had about $5,000 between us. And we were going to go to Europe and buy a whizzer bike, 2 whizzer bikes, and tour.
Mm-hmm.
So we get to and it turns out Studebaker had an assembly plant in Brussels, which I didn't know. My dad worked for Studebaker, and they had a young Belgian over South Bend, Studebaker, getting training. So my dad introduced us, and so we had a friend and a contact with his family in Brussels. So we took off together. He had to stay in New York, and we went on to Brussels. And we got there, we called his folks, and they got us out of the high rent district into a reasonable hotel, the Hotel du Pelican. And so we went to movies one afternoon, and the movie was the Inspector General with Danny Kaye.
Danny Kaye.
Yeah, and it was in English with French subtitles. So after the show was over, we walked back to our hotel, came to a street intersection, and the street light changed against us, and we didn't see it. 2 girls in front of us, and we bumped into them. And the one, I stepped on her shoe, and her shoe came off, and she was not very happy with me. And 2.5 months later, we got married.
How about that?
Yeah, so we got married in Dover, England, because that was the quickest place to go to get married. And, we'd made up our minds, why wait? So we went to Dover, got married, and had an excellent, wonderful relationship with the English over there. And then we shipped out of Southampton on the French line ship Admiral de Grasse.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if Admiral de Grasse was the French admiral that came to Yorktown at the end of the Revolutionary War. And that made a big difference. The English didn't like that.
Yeah, the French were on our side.
The French were on our.
And one of the times they were, anyway.
Yeah. That's what's going on
So
today.
then you settled at where, Tom?
Well, first we went to my folks in South Bend, Indiana. And then I went back to college at Purdue, so we lived in West Lafayette for a while.
So you went to college and I went to work at Purdue.
Good.
Yeah.
As soon as we,
As a nurse?
No, as helping a
Professor.
working on his PhD in statistics. So she gathered information for him.
How does it feel to have your own personal hero living in the same house that you were in?
Well, it's
Pretty gratifying.
yeah, a lot of respect, and yeah, it really, I got to know her whole family and
Mhm.
the situation about her brother. And in fact, that her brother really how we got together. We were supposed to meet with her mother and go to the cemetery to her brother's grave. But we had a dispute. And
yeah, we had broken up.
we'd broken up. And her mother shows up at my hotel, and she said, where's Rose? And I said, well, and she said, do you still want to go to the cemetery? And I said, yes, in respect to her brother, Jules. So her mother and I went over to where she was staying, and I waited outside, and her mother told her I was there, and she grumped a few times, I guess. So then we went down, there was a cafe downstairs, and we stopped for a cup of coffee, and I looked at her and I said, will you marry me? And she instantaneously said, yes.
Wow.
Wow.
She didn't say, I won't admire you, but I'll always admire your choice. She said yes then.
Yeah.
Is that the way it happened, Rose?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it wasn't coffee, it was soup we
Oh,
were
it was
eating.
soup.
Oh, okay. We knew it had to change a little bit, didn't it, Tom?
Yeah.
Well, anything else you want to add? It's been a nice interview. I've talked too much, but
No,
give you one last chance.
that's
There are too many other sad stories. I don't want to start crying.
No, it's not sad, it's history, honey, and we appreciate you
Yeah.
having the guts enough to come up here and talk about it. Because it's not what I want, it is what I want, but it's for the people down the years from us
Yeah.
or have a chance to know what things were like back then.
Yeah, well, that's the only reason I started to talk. When we first came over, his brother-in-law, he kept asking me questions all the time, and I said, I don't want to talk about it. I
No,
just
there wasn't-
never wanted to
there
talk
wasn't
about it.
special.
One other thing, how did you join APHES, the Escape and Evasion Society?
Yeah, how did that happen?
I don't really, I've been thinking about it, I don't really remember how it happened.
Someone had to ask you.
Yeah. It,
It's a long time ago, though, wasn't it?
Yeah,
no,
it's
no,
a few
not
years
long
ago.
time. 3-4 years.
Oh.
I'll tell you, you had your convention in Mesa the year before
Mhm.
we joined, and that's unfortunate because we lived in Tucson, so in 2.5 hours, we could have come to your convention.
Drive.
But we didn't know who you were then.
The reason I wanted to come is I was hoping one of the guys that were hiding, that came past through us, that we didn't know that, you know, we're not supposed to know their name, their real names. Like
Yeah.
Glenn Brennicke was Paul Smith.
Mhm.
He had a Belgian ID card.
Mhm.
With, but he stayed long enough that we talked and, you know,
And
get
he
a
sounds-
little hint here and there where he was living and all that.
Apparently, he sent a
Oh,
message
In
to
fa-
her through the courier system, giving his true name and where he lived.
Well, keep reading communications, maybe we'll make some connection some way, somehow.
That's one of the reasons I came, just if somebody recognizes me.
Mhm.
But then I've changed so much. Look at the picture there, you know. My picture there and the way I look now, yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, how would somebody recognize me that knew me that way,
Uh-huh.
you know?
Well, maybe they will.
But the only thing they might have recognized is the store
And where it was.
and where it was in
Anderlecht.
Anderlecht.
Maybe someone will look at the tape that Stu, Shepherd Air Force Base is putting together for us and make some connection to you. So you're again in
Green Valley,
Green Valley,
Arizona.
Arizona. What's the zip code there?
85614.
Okay. Maybe that'll give them a hint.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you both for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We're speaking now with O.V. Roskey. He was a gunner, ball turret gunner in B-17 at age 19. He's a Texan and he's proud of it. Tell us about it, O.V.
Well, in the first place, I was with a bomb group that had a 26-year-old bird colonel by the name of Elliot Van de Vander. And the 385th Bomb Group was Van's Valiants. I was 548 Squadron, and we ended up, Van had flown in the Pacific. I'm throwing this in because it's important. He was the man that was the last airplane that bombed the Japanese. He had lost an engine, and he bombed the Japanese after the 3 other aircraft had gone over and got to resistance, and naturally ended up getting shot up. Came back to the States. He's the first lieutenant in 1942, made bird colonel in January 1944, and was proud of him. He was some fella. Consequently, I think most people in the organization looked forward to flying in his organization. And we had an outfit that had made several major contributions, and everybody made major contributions, but I mean, they made the historic type setups. Anyways, I had ended up flying with the day that I flew and was shot down. I had another crew that had lost 2 crew members. On the 29th day of January, we went to Frankfurt. We all went to Frankfurt. We went on another mission between the 29th and the 4th of February of '44. We went back to Frankfurt on the 4th, and I filled in. I had been flying dual status as a toggler, which was an enlisted bombardier, and as ball turret. That day their ball turret was out of commission, so I flew the ball turret, which of course was an excellent position because it gave the family jewels protection. That's not the reason it was called a ball turret, but I mean, nevertheless, it's a fact that it had a 2-inch steel plate that protected the family jewels. And in this particular case, we made Frankfurt, was returning. As you know, there's an old deal about Murphy's Law. If anything can go wrong, it will. Well, Roskey's addendum to that is, if it's guaranteed it won't go wrong, it will.
At the worst possible moment.
Exactly. So it ended up, we're on our way back over the, generally over the Ruhr area, and at 25,000 approximately. And 4 Focke-Wulfs hit us. And of course, you know the old story about who's afraid of the big bad wolf. And everybody is afraid of the big bad wolf. They threw the rocket into number 3 and peeled it out like you was taking a pecan meat out of the hull. It left nothing but the strings, and we got a fire behind the firewall. They made second pass, and on that pass they hit number 1 and number 2 and put them into rotation. And they're getting the call. I only had 1 crew member. There was 2 of us from my crew flying the same day, and it was a waist gunner. a fellow by the name of Flaherty, an Irishman, obviously, by the name of Flaherty. And I don't know whether it knocked out the intercom totally, but I didn't get anything after the first rocket was thrown in there. I'm making a pass, the airplanes were passing, and he and I are shooting, and I can't hear anybody else shooting. I know one of the waist gunners, and my guns are firing, but I don't hear anything about bailout or anything, because I know the situation is pretty dire, because I'm looking at the fireball out there on the right wing. And we're making a turn, of course, because the only engine left is number 4. And as it comes into a cycle on the second pass, I'm thinking that we're going to have a blow up very shortly. The plane's going to explode, so I make a move up to get out. As it happens, and we're talking, we keep getting this word about heroes, and it's a commonly used word. Now, this is probably improperly used. We've got people who do their job and are dedicated to their job and do it like it ought to be done. But that's not quite at the hero deal. It's when you go that next step, and this is what Flaherty did. He's got a place he can bail out, but he don't bail out. He comes up and takes the crank, and he don't know whether I'm gonna get up or not. And he's trying to crank the ball turret up. But yet he knows that wing out there, and he's a maintenance man. I mean, he was an engineer, assistant engineer on flight, and he's back there gonna crank me up when he knows that engine is on fire behind a firewall. Now that, you understand, makes the business, as I see it, of that little extra step to hero.
He was laying his life on the line for you, so you
above and beyond, right. I, of course, always accused him that he owed me $40 from a poker game. And being an Irishman, I thought he got it backwards, that I owed him $40, and that he's cranking me up to make sure that $40 is going to be safe. That, of course, never did go down very well. We drank several drinks over that, and I never did convince him that the reason that he was trying to crank me up was to save that damn $40. He cranked, I rotated, and the time frame that was involved, we're talking about here, total time frame from the time they threw the rocket into number 3 till I was out and up in the radio room. Now, the ball turret is not set up so that you can have parachute. This fine colonel that we had, Van, had fortunately 4 days before been down, and we got the new equipment. We got the new suit that was heated, which didn't work, I might add, except the feet and the gloves had gone out, and I'm running on fingers that are not, and feet that are frostbitten. But we got 6 of the parachutes called like the Pioneer backpack, which came around the back and locked across the chest and up. Now this was the first that we ever had, and the colonel was there drawing one when I walked in, and I said, "Do you reckon they got another one of those?" And I'm a 139-pound fella, and he shot skeet with him from time to time. And he said, yes, they give him one. And that saved my life, I'm convinced, because had I not had the Pioneer backpack, I had to shoot up in the radio room where it would not be stopped on. And I came out, rotated, got out of the ball turret, moved up to the radio room, waved off Flaherty, who went and bailed out on the the left-hand side on the B-17. It's the right-hand side really for him from where he's going. He had to go back to the back and bail out of the waist. He had left, and I went up, and we had a radio operator who was about half deaf on this crew, had been a ground operator and had been upgraded to a flight radio operator because they were short-handed. I don't know whether he didn't understand. He hadn't flown a lot. I don't know whether he's sitting there sending SOS as if we were, they were trained to send SOS when you were over the channel or over the North Sea, so you could get somebody out there. There ain't much use sending SOS when you're back over Germany. There ain't nobody gonna come pick you up. Like today, we have that capability, but they didn't have then. Anyway, he's sitting there beating that damn machine, and I'm trying to get him to shoot, and I'm hollering at him to give me some help because I couldn't fasten the thing. And he didn't understand or whatever reason but he's still sending SOS, and the plane blew. And when it blew him apparently in one direction and me in the other. I blew out to the right, and the detonation factor is such at 25,000. I had a headset on, of course, and a cap, and a helmet. It blew me out, and I'm about 300, 400 feet, maybe more. And I looked to the left, and it looked like you had taken, it's amazing how you focus on things and can pinpoint these things in segments. The airplane had been chopped in two, just ahead of about where the ball turret was, and had totally disintegrated. And everything else was from there back was as pretty as you ever seen, just sitting out there. And at this point, of course, I'm worrying about the parachute because I haven't got parachute finished. I've just got to throw it around my shoulders. And it had happened, it blew him out apparently in the other direction or somewhere from where I was, and broke a leg and beat an arm up. He ended up fortunately being picked up immediately by the Germans. I'm worrying about the shoot deal, so I take a free fall. The navigator had given us a position report, and we had a cloud coverage at 14,000 approximately, solid. And I free fell down to not really knowing, but I fell into the overcast about 1,000 feet after I jerked the chute. When I jerked the chute, the thing didn't seem to want to work. I mean, we're talking about a short time frame. Your brain is funny about that. It expands time or reduces it depending on what the circumstances are. So I end up, I've got my arms wrapped in front of me because I don't have the thing locked up. And so I done a flip. Because the chute didn't open, I thought. I mean, it wasn't opening. It had happened, I flipped away from it, fortunately, instead of into it. And, of course, it was opening. It was blown out and was opening. And at that point, when it opened, of course, it was a hell of a shock. And it took me, since it was just over my shoulders, it took and rotated. And it rotated me in the chute. And it jerked my arms out to the point. I mean, I've got them locked inside, and it jerked them out to where I'm holding. And then at that, when you get a second shock, which nobody ever tells you, of course, about this before. Now, since then, I've gone through parachute operations, but I mean, at that point, I didn't know that you got that second shock. And when it came over on the second one, well, it rotated down and brought the whole thing up over my shoulders, and the breast on the Pioneer backpack type had these big, heavy risers, you know, I mean, not the risers, but the support units. And I come to, and on the second shock, and it comes up, and it's gone off of me, and I'm thinking, I'm floating, I think, but I don't know, because you don't have any damn thing to judge by. And I look up there, I've got to shoot the straps, one in each. I can't feel them. The problem was because I had the frostbite on feet and hand. I don't have any feeling left. So, I mean, at this point, I'm being pretty thankful, of course, because I'm not hanging out there with nothing. But I look up there, and I'm holding on that damn thing, and all of a sudden I find I would go into the overcast. And I'm looking up there at it, and I'm thinking to myself, there's something out of kilter here. I'm not getting any air. Well, the reason I wasn't getting any air is because I had borrowed the waist gunners. They used to have those 12-foot long scars that kept them freezing to death out there with the wind blast. And I'd borrowed one from my crew was not flying that day. We were supposed to be going on our 12 mission. You got a break, you know. And I'd borrowed his. And what happened when it came up, that damn scarf had come up, and I'm holding it under my hand, and it's choking me. And I'm not getting any air. And now this piss you off, if you'll pardon the expression. You know, I mean, everything's gone wrong. Like I said, this is Roskey's addendum. It will go wrong regardless. And I've been through a lot of years, and it always is the same. You're shooting dice, same thing. It ends up, I'm not getting any air. Well, I'm going up, you know, I'm pulling up. And this thing is very elastic. I don't know whether you remember those scars or not, whether you ever saw one, but it was a beautifully made, stretchable, but, and it was like, say, about 12 foot long and go around about 3 or 4 times and then hang down. So I'd go up and get a little air. Well, unfortunately in cadets, I went through flight training, and I did not ever pass more. I could do everything but pull-ups. I never could understand why it was necessary to pull up and then go back down and pull up. You know, this did not make sense. I could do 12 of them, which was required. But I could climb the rope and all the other things, but I never could see the logic of pulling up and then going back. Well, I'm doing 12's the maximum I ever done. I'm not, I'm going up to get some air, and I run about my 12, and things is not improving. I don't know how high I am by this time. I know that I'm below 14,000, but it's solid overcast. I'm not a religious type from a viewpoint. I just know that there's a man that runs the thing, you know. I've been some tights a number of times, and I don't bring this up very often, but I'm out of air, and I ain't able to go back up there. I can't make another drag, and I didn't think I could, and I said, Lord, help me. And either the brain plays strange tricks on you know, but I heard the voice say, how the hell are you, not, he didn't say it like that. He said, Roskey, how do you think you got where you are? And I'm at that point. Only twice in my life have I ever been at that critical point to where hysteria might take over. And once I had a pony that was, me and the pony was locked up in a batch of wire, of barbed wire. And that time I nearly panicked. And this time I was ready to panic. And I got, at that point, when I got the word, I wasn't still under stress, but I mean, I had a feeling that things was all right. And I handled it, just went ahead, and I'd keep going up and getting a little air. And I landed when I hit the ground. I mean, I went in a snowstorm. And it made a beautiful landing, and haven't made a parachute jump since then any better or as good. Landed on a slope, hit and rolled. Everything is beautiful. I'm on the ground, air's coming in, and all of a sudden the air's cut off again. And what happened, parachute's dragging me, and it's got that arm out there with this thing. And just for a second there, I got extremely angry. And I rolled up on that damn thing and got loose from it and just stomped my parachute for about 30 seconds. And just a matter of
You're mad at it.
burn up that energy deal, you know. So it ended up, I rolled it up, it was in a snowstorm, rolled it up and just throwed snow over it. And I don't know where the hell I am. I know where the navigator deal, but it happened between Maastricht in Holland and the German town that has the beautiful cathedrals just over where the bulge was. And it was in there, between there somewhere.
Hold on. We're speaking now with Mr. Frank Schaffer. He's a 23-year-old B-24 flight engineer on his 7th mission over Le Perth, France, about 60 miles east of Paris. Had a little bit of mechanical trouble there, Frank. What happened?
We had faulty prop governor on number 2 engine, and instead of me being in the top turret in combat, I stayed between the 2 pilots monitoring the RPMs on number 2 engine with a little toggle switch, synchronizing switch, because the propeller would overspeed or underspeed, and I corrected it with the toggle switch. But while we were on a bomb run at Le Perth, our target, the engine started to speed. The propeller was going into low pitch, and all at once I could not control it. I could not slow it down, and we had a runaway propeller, and it went up as far as 4,500 RPM, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. And the co-pilot tried to feather the propeller, and it would not feather. The oil pressure went down to 0, so we were losing our oil. And as an engineer, I went into the bomb bay, the forward end of the bomb bay, and turned off the fuel to that engine. But have further efforts to control that engine. It was shaking very violently and roaring like a tornado. Finally, it caught fire, and I did not hear any bailout signal nor bell, but I saw the co-pilot rise up out of his seat and tear his headsets and mics and whatnot, oxygen and whatever off of, and I figured that meant bailout. But I snapped on my dropped my flak suit, snapped on my parachute, and headed back, and I tapped the gunner who was in the top turret on the leg and crooked my finger at him to come down out of there. And so I got down on the catwalk And then realizing I had not heard any bailout signal nor command, I tried swinging around the bomb rack to get out of the way of the others. I wasn't going to be the first one out and make a fool of myself. In doing that, I must have snagged the ripcord handle on one of the bomb shackles, because when I got on the catwalk behind the bomb rack, I noticed it was out about 3/4 of an inch, and I pushed it back in. But while I was standing, a moment later or whatever, the chute started to spill in the bomb bay, and I quick grabbed it in my arms, and more folds were coming out because the bomb bay doors were wide open, and with the wind roaring through, more folds were coming out, and I managed to get them all in my arms, and I couldn't do anything but hold that parachute. And meanwhile, I saw other people dropping out of the airplane. Somebody from the nose section and the pilot and the radio operator were standing in the forward end. I worked myself into the front end of the rear bomb bay, and I rolled out and down, and the second I was below the airplane, I just ripped out of my arms, and it was open. I was jammed down in the parachute harness, very painful in the crotch.
Oh, yeah.
And I was swinging violently like a pendulum. Each time I raised up one side, the chute would half collapse. And then as I swung the other way, it would half collapse on the other side. And I had gone out with my helmet off and my gloves off, and it was extremely cold. But, and my breath was I was breathing very hard due to the thin air. Well, gradually my swinging slowed down, and I couldn't do anything about the coldness until I got lower and the air warmed up and my breathing eased up. We were at 20,000 feet, by the way. And it took me about 20 minutes to reach the ground. And when I was maybe a couple of thousand feet up, I could see French people running around on the ground, somebody on motorcycle or bicycle along the road. And I came down into a cut grain or hay field, open field, and I landed pretty hard, but I got up and rode up to chute and to harness, and I ran over towards a gravel road which had a line of bushes along the ditch, and I threw the parachute under a bush, and I continued running, and there was one gunshot, and I think somebody fired it towards me, because I thought I heard a bullet whistle by. And then I happened to look down while I was running, and I was still wearing that yellow Mae West. So I took that off and threw it under another bush, and by that time there were several young Frenchmen around me, and other French people were gathering, and one fellow wanted me to get on his bicycle and ride, and I sort of declined. I didn't know where I was supposed to go, but we continued walking along the road with half a dozen French people, and suddenly the fella's tire on the bicycle blew out. And I sort of gave a little laugh, but it wasn't really funny. Well, they got me to a little crossroads, sort of a village, a half dozen houses maybe, and the fellas wanted to take me into one of the houses, and the woman there very much did not want me in her house. She kept arguing. There was a big argument going on for a little while. So they got me into another house, a little distant, and into a bedroom, and they got me to take my flying clothes off, and gave me an old pair of pants and a t-shirt, which I put on, and also I changed shoes. I had my GI boots fastened to the parachute in case I had to bail out, which helped a lot because I had my GI shoes with me in France. And they took the flying suit and rolled it up, and we left the house, and one of the Frenchmen had a horse hitched up to a little wagon, and they told me to lie down in the wagon, and they headed out towards some forest, woods. So I was lying in that wagon while the two men were leading the horse. And they got into the woods, and they started scratching at one spot, and they uncovered a hole in the ground. And I was told, signaled to get into that hole, which they then covered over and with leaves and sticks or whatever. And I understood I was supposed to stay in that hole until nightfall, which I did. And around dusk, the two men showed up and got me out of the hole. And I indicated on the escape map, which I took out of my escape kit, that I would start walking towards Spain with my fingers. And they said no. They indicated no, I should not do that. Then I indicated that I might walk towards the American troops, which were breaking out at St. Lo at that time on the Brest Peninsula. And they said no, and but that I would follow them. We started walking through woods, fields, and whatnot, and we came to one field where we hesitated, and there was they signaled with a flashlight, and there was an answering signal from on the other side of the field. So that was a signal that we were joining two other fellas. And I went with those other two, and the first two fellas returned to wherever they came from. So we started walking through more woods, fields, and whatnot, crossing roads, being very cautious. And they told me we were going past a crash site of a Lancaster bomber, which we did. We stopped and looked at a tremendous hole in the ground. And there was one or two other Frenchmen sort of standing guard at that crash site. But they indicated that I should not speak or try to say anything, because those two fellas watching the crash site were collaborators. we then went on and finally came down a steep hill, and I heard a church bells, and I knew we were getting near a village or church or something. And we came along a pathway leading to a road and with a house on the side of it. And one of the fellas advanced and knocked on the front door of the house. And an elderly woman answered the door. And then they escorted me around through a gate and to the back door where I entered the house. And this was the village of Orbe, and the family's name was Beignet. And it was this older woman and her 2 children, a man and a woman, who were both in their approximately 50s. And in this house I stayed the night, and I continued to stay for about 3 weeks, hiding out from any Germans. And I used to watch German troops go by on the road in front during the days. But finally, General Patton's troops came through and liberated us. And that was a great celebration. And that's when they started serving champagne. So eventually, after a couple of days of celebrating, the French took some of us. There turned out to be more evaders in that village that came out of their various hiding spots. And we were taken to the city of Epernay, farther north, and from there we were taken on also on a charcoal or wood-burning truck to Paris and turned over to the Americans. And I don't know if you want any more.
Well, you're in France now. How'd you get back to England? They fly you back? They take you by boat?
Well, we were flown back to England on a C-47 from Paris.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to know, Frank, is while you're hiding out during the day, you were down there with the beignets for 3 weeks.
Yes.
What did you do during the day to pass time? How did you...
I was getting pretty bored sitting around, and I requested a deck of cards, which was furnished. And I forgot to mention there was this Frenchman also staying at the house on and off, and he had been dropped into France by parachute, and he had a radio set and various equipment, and he was radioing back messages to London. And I managed to communicate with him quite a bit because he knows some English. But then also I helped doing a little haying and out in the barn, and they had some beehives, and we were separating honey from honeycombs, and I was running working a centrifuge, separate the honey, turning a cast iron crank, and I got too vigorous and the crank broke in half, and that stopped the honey separating for that day. And I don't know if they ever managed to get that crank repaired or replaced. Nowadays you would take it to the blacksmith shop or something and have it spliced up or welded up.
Well, it helped pass the time. Helped
Yeah,
pass the time.
yeah.
And you were in the house, in the attic, or in the room?
I was in the back bedroom. They had a back bedroom, and I was slept in a feather bed where the rest of my crew, who were not captured, were living out in the woods with the Maquis in lean-tos or tents or whatever. So I had it very much better than they did. 2 of our crew were prisoners, the radio operator and 1 gunner. And the rest of them were in the woods with the Maquis in a way. And they managed. 4 of us were injured. I was not. One fella had a compound broken leg because he was trying to collapse the chute partially to get down faster. And he landed before the chute was fully opened. And that's the reason he was turned over to the Germans. And the radio operator said he came down among Germans. I don't know if it was a flak gun crew or not. And 2 of the others had cuts or whatever. Otherwise, we all managed. And we were liberated. Anyway, we were liberated on August 28th, 1944, by General Patton's Third Army troops.
I was 13 years old that day. So that was a pretty good day. Now, with your experience with German troops and the ones that you shared experiences with, how did the Germans treat you or treat the others?
I don't. There was no contact with Germans that I know of except by the 2 who were taken prisoner. I saw Germans. I used to watch German convoys go by on the road from behind the curtains. And one day a German soldier came into the house and he wanted a drink. And this lady was very nervous about it. She gave him cider instead of water. And but he left after that. And I was hiding. I was in the bedroom on one side of the door, and I could hear him out in the hallway and talking, but I don't know what was said.
Yeah. When General Patton was coming in from the west, could you hear the cannons in the background?
Yes, I could hear gunfire maybe 1 or 2 days beforehand, before the American troops finally arrived. But I had no contact with General Patton. It was his soldiers.
Oh, of course.
And about this time, we were bumming cigarettes and candy bars and things from the soldiers.
Do you remember the first soldier you met? What happened?
No, we used to hear these German convoys going through the town, and there was always a lot of rumbling from their vehicles. And the day the Americans came, we heard the same thing through the center of the village and didn't pay much attention to it because we thought it was more Germans going through. And it turned out that this young 10-year or 11-year-old girl who was part of a niece of these people living in this house came running up and knocked on the door and said the Americans were there or something. I didn't quite get the idea of it. But at that time we were all sitting at the dinner table in the front room having a meal. And everybody rushed out of the house, and they had me so accustomed to not being seen out on the street that I stayed in. until this lady, Lucienne Beignet, came running back and called me out again, called me out onto the street, which was the first time I'd been out on the street since I came there. Otherwise, I had only been into the backyard, which was almost completely surrounded by a high stone wall. And that was one of my pastimes also, to sit out in the backyard watching the chickens or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, great time walking the chickens, yeah. It beats the heck out of being captured.
This French fella that was a spy brought a bag of tobacco and papers, and he told me that if I rolled the cigarettes, I could smoke all I wanted, which I started rolling cigarettes. And I made a lot of cigarettes. And at first they were lumpy or tapered or whatever, but finally I got pretty good at making cigarettes out of that French tobacco. And that was one of my occupations also.
Well, that's real interesting, Frank Schaffer, and I want to thank you so much for what you did for our country, and I want to thank you for being here with us and getting it on tape, and good luck in the future.